What if everything you thought you knew about Westeros was a lie? The Night's King wasn't the monster. He was just the first victim. Princess Arya didn't die from fireworms. She was consumed by Valyrian bioweapons, still hunting intruders centuries after the doom. Cersei isn't waiting for her little brother to kill her. She's been murdering herself for decades. These aren't fan theories. They're the horrifying truths hidden beneath every song, every legend, every historical fact you've been told. The real Game of Thrones was never about who sits the Iron Throne. It was about cosmic forces using humanity as test subjects in experiments that span millennia. From body horror that makes the Red Wedding look gentle to conspiracy theories that reach back to before humans existed, these 18 revelations will shatter everything you believed about the Seven Kingdoms. Each theory is more disturbing than the last, building toward a truth so vast and terrifying that it redefines the very nature of reality itself. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you can possibly imagine, and once you start falling, there's no way back to the comfort of ignorance. Theory 1. The Corpse Queen's enthrallment. The true source of the Night's King's power. The legendary Night's King, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who fell to darkness, represents one of the most chilling tales in Westerosi history. But the true horror isn't what he became. It's how he was made. Old Nan's whispered tales speak of a Lord Commander who saw something in the haunted lands beyond the wall. A woman with skin cold as ice and eyes like blue stars. A creature of otherworldly beauty and terrible purpose. When she appeared to him, he gave her his seed, and in that moment of twisted intimacy, he gave her his soul. But here's where the accepted narrative crumbles into something far more terrifying. The strange sorceries that allowed the Night's King to bind his sworn brothers to his will, the magic that transformed honorable men of the Watch into willing servants of darkness. These powers weren't his own. They emanated from her, the Corpse Queen, like a seductive poison that corrupted everything it touched. This suggests that the others possess something far more insidious than simple necromancy. They wield a form of enthrallment magic that doesn't just raise the dead, it corrupts the living, turning free will into slavish devotion. The Night's King became patient zero in a supernatural plague of loyalty, his very presence rewiring the minds of those around him. Consider the implications. The Corpse Queen didn't just seduce one man. She created a weapon of mass corruption. The Night's King became her instrument for spreading this mind-altering influence throughout the most sacred institution protecting the realm. The black cells beneath the Night Fort, where he made his sacrifices to the others, weren't just execution chambers. They were laboratories where human consciousness was systematically dismantled and rebuilt. The true terror of this theory lies in its subtlety. Unlike the obvious threat of shambling whites, this corruption worked through love, loyalty, and trust. The Night's King's men followed him willingly, believing they were serving their Lord Commander, even as their souls were being devoured from within. It was the perfect infiltration, using humanity's greatest strengths against itself. When Brandon the Breaker and Joramun finally brought down the Night's King, they weren't just deposing a tyrant. They were stopping a supernatural virus that threatened to spread beyond the wall, potentially corrupting the entire realm through the same seductive, soul-stealing magic. The Night's King's legacy wasn't just 13 years of horror, it was proof that the other's greatest weapon isn't winter or death, but the perversion of human connection itself. Theory 2. Arya's Doom. The legacy of Valyria's forbidden biosorcery. Princess Arya Targaryen's return from Old Valyria remains one of the most horrifying episodes in Targaryen history. But the accepted explanation, that she was killed by common fireworms, barely scratches the surface of the true nightmare that befell her. When Arya disappeared on her stolen dragon Balerion, She was a spirited girl seeking adventure. When she returned nearly a year later, she brought with her horrors that would make the Meisters of the Citadel burn their books rather than record them in full. The official account, sanitized and clinical, describes creatures emerging from her body that cooked her from within. But this sterile description masks the true abomination of what Valyria had become. Arya didn't simply encounter parasites. She stumbled into the remnants of Valyria's most forbidden experiments, bio-magical weapons that were the pinnacle of Dragonlord sorcery. The Valyrian freehold wasn't just built on dragons and slavery. It was sustained by a ruthless pursuit of magical supremacy that pushed the boundaries of what should exist in the natural world. These weren't creatures in any conventional sense. They were sentient magical defenses, biological guardians created through techniques that blended life, death, and fire into something that violated the fundamental laws of existence. The Valyrians had learned to breed not just dragons, but living weapons that could detect intruders, infiltrate their bodies, and destroy them from within while feeding on their life force. What Arya encountered in the ruins of Valyria was a security system still active decades after the Doom, a network of biological sentinels designed to eliminate anyone who might seek to reclaim the dangerous knowledge of the Freehold. These creatures didn't just kill. They studied their victims, learning from each intrusion to become more effective at preventing the next. The creatures that emerged from Arya's body were juveniles, incomplete versions of what they were meant to become. Had she survived longer, had the infection been allowed to fully mature, she would have become something else entirely. A hybrid being that was part Targaryen, part Valyrian bioweapon, carrying within her genetic memory the secrets that destroyed the greatest civilization the world had ever known. Even mighty Balerion, the Black Dread himself, bore the scars of their encounter. The dragon that had burned Harrenhal to slag, that had terrorized entire armies, returned wounded and diminished. If the greatest dragon in history could barely escape with his life, what chance did any future expedition have? Septon Barth's fragmentary writings suggest he understood the true implications of Arya's fate. Valyria wasn't just cursed, it was actively defended by the very sorcery that had once made it great. The Doom hadn't ended Valyrian magic. It had transformed it into something far more dangerous, a self-perpetuating system of magical defense that would persist until the end of time. This is why no expedition to reclaim Valyria's treasures has ever succeeded. It's not because of lingering radiation or unstable magic. It's because Valyria itself has become a living tomb, guarded by horrors specifically designed to ensure that its secrets die with it. Theory 3. The Valonqar's true face. Cersei's self-wrought. Doom. Maggie the Frog's prophecy to young Cersei Lannister has haunted both the character and readers for decades, but the most chilling revelation may be hiding in plain sight. The Valonqar, the little brother destined to wrap his hands around Cersei's pale white throat, may not be Tyrion, Jaime, or any external force at all. The Valonqar is Cersei herself. In High Valyrian, Valonqar literally means little brother. But the prophecy's true horror lies in its psychological precision. Cersei's paranoia about the prophecy hasn't just shaped her actions. It has created a secondary personality, a younger version of herself that embodies all her most destructive impulses. This shadow self, born from fear and nurtured by wine and wildfire, has been systematically orchestrating her downfall for decades. Consider Cersei's pattern of behavior. Every major decision she makes, ostensibly to protect herself from the prophecy, actually brings her closer to fulfilling it. She arms the faith militant to destroy Margaery, only to find herself imprisoned by them. She destroys the Sept of Baelor to escape trial, only to unite all her enemies against her. She hoards wildfire to protect the Red Keep, creating the very weapon that could destroy her. This isn't mere irony. It's the systematic work of a fractured psyche. The Valonqar isn't a person but a psychological construct, the embodiment of Cersei's self-destructive tendencies that she has unconsciously personified as a little brother. Every time she drinks, every time she makes a decision based on fear rather than wisdom, she's feeding this shadow self. The prophecy works because it's not predicting external events, it's describing internal psychology. Cersei has spent so long afraid of being destroyed by a little brother that she has created one within herself. This internal Valonqar knows all her weaknesses, all her secrets, all her fears, because it is her. It knows exactly how to manipulate her into making the choices that will destroy her. The hands that will wrap around her throat won't belong to Tyrion or Jaime. They'll be her own hands, guided by the part of her psyche that has been planning her destruction since childhood. The prophecy isn't a supernatural curse. It's a psychological trap that Cersei built for herself and has been walking toward her entire life. When the moment comes, when Cersei finally faces her end, she'll realize the horrible truth. She was never the victim of the prophecy. She was its author, its architect, and its willing executioner. The Valonqar has been with her all along, whispering in her ear with her own voice, convincing her that each act of self-preservation was actually an act of self-destruction. This reading transforms Cersei from a victim of fate into a masterpiece of tragic psychology. A woman so afraid of being destroyed by others that she became her own greatest enemy, systematically dismantling her own life while believing she was protecting it. Theory 4. The Sorceress Cold War, Valeria's self-inflicted doom. The doom of Valyria represents the single greatest catastrophe in recorded history, but the commonly accepted explanations, natural disaster, slave rebellion, or simple magical accident, pale before the true scope of what destroyed the freehold. Valyria died not from external forces, but from an internal magical arms race that spiraled beyond all control. The 40 families of dragon lords who ruled Valyria weren't just nobility. They were rival magical superpowers locked in a centuries-long Cold War of arcane escalation. Each family possessed unique magical specializations, jealously guarded secrets passed down through bloodlines and maintained through selective breeding and careful study. What began as healthy competition for magical supremacy gradually transformed into something far more dangerous. As the freehold expanded and conquered, the Dragonlord families found themselves with unprecedented resources and ever greater incentives to outdo their rivals. They began experimenting with increasingly forbidden forms of sorcery, pushing the boundaries of what was possible or safe. The 14 flames, the volcanic peaks that provided the magical energy for their civilization, became not just sources of power, but testing grounds for ever more ambitious magical experiments. The competition escalated beyond dragons, beyond simple fire magic, into realms that violated the fundamental laws of existence. Some families delved into biological manipulation, creating the hybrid horrors that would eventually guard Valyria's ruins. Others explored temporal magic, attempting to gain advantages by manipulating time itself. Still others ventured into dimensional sorcery, seeking power from beyond the known world, but the most dangerous experiments involved the 14 flames themselves. The Dragonlords discovered that the volcanic system wasn't just a source of magical energy. It was a carefully balanced magical construct, held in equilibrium by ancient spells that they barely understood. Instead of respecting this balance, they began competing to see who could extract more power, who could push the system further, who could achieve greater magical breakthroughs. The final phase of this magical arms race involved direct manipulation of the volcanic system's control mechanisms. Rival families began sabotaging each other's magical infrastructure, assassinating key fire mages and disrupting the delicate spells that kept the 14 flames stable. What started as subtle sabotage escalated into open magical warfare conducted in the volcanic depths beneath Valyria. The doom wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was the inevitable result of this escalating magical Cold War. When the control systems finally failed, when the accumulated damage to the volcanic equilibrium reached critical mass, the release of energy was biblical in scope. The 14 flames didn't just erupt. They unleashed centuries of accumulated magical energy in a single cataclysmic explosion that shattered the landscape and tore holes in reality itself. The few survivors who escaped spoke of dragons fighting, dragons in the skies above Valyria, even as the ground beneath them liquefied. These weren't battles against external enemies. They were the final, desperate clashes of the Dragonlord families, still fighting each other even as their civilization burned around them. The true tragedy of Valyria is that it possessed the greatest magical knowledge in history, but destroyed itself through the very ambition and competition that had made it great. The doom wasn't an accident or an attack. It was suicide on a civilizational scale, the inevitable outcome of a magical arms race that no one had the wisdom to stop. Theory 5. The Whispering Stones, relics of a pre-human epoch, scattered across the known world like breadcrumbs from a forgotten feast. The anomalous, oily black stones represent one of the most profound mysteries in human history. These aren't Valyrian artifacts or even human constructions. They're the remnants of a civilization so ancient and alien that their very existence challenges everything we understand about the world's origins. From the light drinking stones of Ashai to the jungle-defying walls of Yin, from the sea stone chair of the Iron Islands to the very foundation of the High Tower in Old Town, these structures share an impossible commonality. Their oily or greasy texture distinguishes them completely from any known stone, including the fused dragonstone of Valyria. They seem to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an unsettling visual effect that makes observers feel as though they're looking into an abyss rather than at solid matter. But the true horror lies not in their appearance but in their influence. These stones don't just sit passively in their ancient placements. They actively affect the minds and fates of those who dwell near them. The influence is subtle, working over generations rather than moments, amplifying certain human traits while suppressing others. In Ashai, they seem to enhance arcane sensitivity, creating a population naturally attuned to shadow magic. At the High Tower, they may have contributed to the High Tower's unusual longevity and their uncanny ability to position themselves advantageously in political conflicts. The pattern becomes clear when you map the locations of these stones against the rise and fall of civilizations. Wherever they're found, human societies develop along eerily similar trajectories, periods of rapid advancement followed by sudden, catastrophic collapse. It's as if the stones are conducting some vast experiment, using human civilization as test subjects in a study whose purpose we cannot even begin to comprehend. Meister Kurth's writings about the sea stone chair provide the most chilling clue about their origins. His suggestion that the chair was left by visitors from across the Sunset Sea isn't metaphorical, it's literal. These stones are markers, waypoints left by beings from somewhere else entirely, possibly not even from this world. They're monitoring stations designed to observe and subtly guide the development of whatever primitive life forms they encountered. The stone's resistance to natural processes is particularly unsettling. In Yin, the jungle that consumes everything else in Sothorios cannot touch the black stone walls. It's not that the jungle avoids them, it literally cannot grow near them, as if the stones emit some force that negates biological processes. This suggests technology so advanced that it operates on principles beyond current human understanding, possibly manipulating fundamental forces like entropy itself. What's most terrifying is the possibility that these stones are still active, still serving their original purpose. Every major historical event, every rise and fall of kingdoms, every prophetic revelation might be part of a vast, multi-millennial experiment being conducted by intelligences so far beyond human comprehension that we're not even aware we're being studied. The stones aren't just archaeological curiosities, they're proof that humanity has never been alone in this world, and that our entire history may be nothing more than data points in an alien research project that began before the first human drew breath. Theory 6. The bleeding star as sacrificial sigil, a recurring harbinger of transformation. The bleeding star that appears throughout prophecies and legends isn't a single astronomical event. It's a recurring cosmic signature that marks moments when the fundamental nature of reality itself is being rewritten through sacrifice and transformation. Understanding this pattern reveals a hidden structure underlying all of history's most pivotal moments. Every culture in the known world has some version of the bleeding star legend, but they're not describing different events. They're recording different manifestations of the same cosmic principle. The star doesn't just appear, it responds to acts of profound sacrifice that release enough spiritual energy to literally tear holes in the fabric of reality. These aren't random occurrences, but carefully orchestrated moments of cosmic significance. The Azor Ahai prophecy provides the clearest example of this pattern. When Azor Ahai drove Lightbringer through Nisa's heart, he wasn't just forging a magical sword. He was performing a ritual of such profound sacrifice that it registered on a cosmic scale. The bleeding star that marked this moment wasn't coincidence. It was the universe's response to the unleashing of transformative power. Nisa's death literally bled into the heavens, staining the stars with the magnitude of her sacrifice. Rhaegar Targaryen understood this connection, which is why he interpreted the comet seen on the night of Aegon's conception as the bleeding star of prophecy. He wasn't witnessing a random celestial event. He was seeing the cosmic response to his own act of sacrifice. By abandoning his wife and breaking his marriage vows for love of Lyanna Stark, he was performing his own version of the Nisa sacrifice, trading personal honor and family stability for what he believed would be the salvation of the world. The red comet that appeared after Daenerys hatched her dragons provides the most recent example of this pattern. The ritual that brought the dragons to life, performed on Drogo's funeral pyre with the sacrifice of Mirri Maz Duur and Daenerys' own symbolic death and rebirth, was powerful enough to literally paint the sky red. The comet wasn't announcing the dragon's birth. It was the cosmic response to the sacrificial energy released by their creation. But the pattern extends beyond individual acts of sacrifice to encompass dynastic and civilizational transformations. The sword Dawn, forged from a fallen star, represents the physical manifestation of this principle. House Dane doesn't just wield a meteoric blade. They're the guardians of crystallized sacrificial energy, a weapon that embodies the cosmic forces released when reality itself is transformed through sacrifice. Aaron Damphair's vision of the bleeding star bespoke the end reveals the pattern's true scope. The bleeding star doesn't just mark individual transformations, it signals the approach of cosmic reset events, moments when the accumulated weight of sacrificial energy becomes so great that reality itself must be fundamentally restructured. This understanding reframes every major prophecy and legend. The bleeding star isn't predicting future events, it's marking the moments when the universe acknowledges that enough sacrificial energy has been released to justify a fundamental transformation of reality. Every time it appears, it's announcing that the old world is ending and a new one is about to begin, written in the blood of those who paid the ultimate price for change. The terrifying implication is that these sacrificial moments aren't random, they're required. The universe demands periodic payments of sacrificial energy to maintain its stability, and the bleeding star is the receipt that acknowledges payment has been made in full. Theory 7. Waking dragons from stone. The rituals of Dragonstone, the prophetic. Phrase "to wake dragons from stone" has been interpreted as a simple metaphor for hatching petrified dragon eggs, but this surface reading misses the true depth of ancient Valyrian magic. The phrase describes a complex ritual process that harnesses the volcanic nature of Dragonstone itself, transforming the island into a massive magical amplifier capable of reawakening not just dragons, but the dormant Targaryen bloodline's deepest magical potential. Dragonstone isn't just a castle built on a volcanic island. It's a carefully constructed magical instrument designed to channel and focus the elemental forces that flow through the volcanic system. The castle's dragon-carved architecture isn't decorative. Each carved dragon serves as a magical focus point, designed to capture and direct specific types of energy. The entire island is essentially a massive ritual circle, with the castle at its center serving as the primary focus for magical workings of unprecedented scale. The Azor Ahai prophecy's requirement that the prince that was promised be born amidst salt and smoke isn't describing birthplace characteristics. It's describing the specific magical conditions necessary to awaken dormant draconic bloodline abilities. Dragonstone provides both elements in abundance: the salt of the narrow sea that surrounds it and the smoke of the volcanic fissures that run beneath it. But more importantly, it provides these elements in their magically active forms, charged with the same primordial energies that originally gave birth to dragons. The process of waking dragons from stone involves more than simple incubation. It requires the systematic reactivation of volcanic magical conduits that have been dormant since the doom of Valyria. The Targaryens' historical attempts to hatch dragon eggs weren't failing because they lacked knowledge. They were failing because they didn't understand that Dragonstone itself needed to be awakened first, its volcanic magical system brought back to full operational capacity. This explains why the Targaryens were drawn to Dragonstone generations before the doom. Dennis, the dreamer's prophetic vision, wasn't just warning her family to flee Valyria. It was directing them to the one place in the world where their bloodline's magical potential could be fully restored. Dragonstone was always meant to be the backup system, the emergency magical facility that could restart Targaryen power if the primary systems in Valyria were ever destroyed. The ritual requires the integration of three elements: the physical, dragon eggs, representing potential; the volcanic magical system of Dragonstone, representing power; and a Targaryen bloodline member with sufficient magical sensitivity, representing control. When all three elements are properly aligned and activated, the result isn't just the hatching of individual dragons, it's the restoration of the entire magical ecosystem that originally supported dragon civilization. Daenerys' successful hatching of her dragons in the Dothraki Sea worked not because she had learned the proper techniques, but because her exposure to the magical fires of Dragonstone during her birth had already begun the awakening process within her bloodline. The funeral pyre ritual simply completed what had been started on Dragonstone years earlier. This understanding transforms Dragonstone from a simple fortress into the most important magical site in the known world, a facility specifically designed to preserve and restore the magical heritage of old Valyria. The castle isn't just the ancestral seat of House Targaryen. It's a dormant magical superweapon waiting for someone with the knowledge and bloodline authority to wake it from its long slumber. The true power of awakening dragons from stone isn't just about bringing extinct creatures back to life. It's about restoring humanity's connection to the fundamental magical forces that shape the world itself. Theory 8. Land's golden deceit. Weirwood whispers and casterly magic. the legendary conquest of Casterly Rock by Lan. The clever represents far more than a triumph of wit over strength. It was the successful exploitation of ancient First Men magic that had been dormant within the rock for thousands of years. Lan didn't simply trick his way into the greatest fortress in Westeros. He awakened powers that had been sleeping in the stone itself, using them to turn the Casterly family's own minds against them. Casterly Rock isn't just a castle built into a mountain, it's a massive magical construct that predates human civilization in Westeros. The rock's vast gold deposits aren't merely valuable resources, they're crystallized magical energy, accumulated over millennia and charged with the same forces that flow through the weirwood network. The gold doesn't just gleam, it resonates, with a frequency that can influence human consciousness when properly manipulated. The key to understanding Lan's true methods lies in the twisted weirwood that still grows in Casterly Rock's Godswood. This isn't just any weirwood, it's a focal point for the same network that allows green seers to see across time and space. But unlike the northern weirwoods that connect to the benevolent consciousness of the old gods, this southern tree had been corrupted by centuries of isolation and the influence of the gold deposits surrounding it. Lan discovered that the combination of the corrupted weirwood and the magically charged gold created a unique form of localized magic, the ability to project thoughts and whispers directly into the minds of anyone living within the rock. The varied tales of his conquest aren't contradictory. They're describing different aspects of the same magical assault. He didn't just whisper threats to sleeping Casterlys, he implanted nightmares, false memories, and paranoid delusions that turned them against each other. The lions that Lanny supposedly smuggled into the rock weren't actual beasts. They were manifestations of the weirwood's corrupted consciousness, phantoms of gold and shadow that could appear real enough to terrify, but substantial enough to cause actual harm. The magic allowed him to create a sustained campaign of psychological warfare that made the Casterlys believe their own home had turned against them. But the most insidious aspect of Lan's conquest was how he turned the rock's defensive magic into an offensive weapon. The same forces that should have protected the Casterlys from outside influence became the mechanism for their destruction. By learning to harmonize with the weirwood's corrupted frequency, Lan could make the rock itself whisper his commands, turning the very stones of the fortress into instruments of manipulation. The process took years to complete, with Lan gradually establishing himself as the dominant consciousness within the rock's magical network. Each night, the corrupted weirwood would carry his influence deeper into the minds of the Casterly family, slowly rewriting their thoughts and loyalties until they began to see him not as an intruder, but as their rightful lord. This magical conquest explains the Lannisters' subsequent relationship with Casterly Rock and their uncanny ability to accumulate wealth. They're not just living in the fortress, they're symbiotically connected to its magical systems, drawing power from the same gold and weirwood network that Lan originally exploited. Every Lannister born in the rock carries a trace of this magical influence, giving them an intuitive understanding of manipulation and an almost supernatural ability to recognize and exploit weakness in others. The true legacy of Lan, the Clever, isn't just the founding of House Lannister, it's the proof that the ancient magical systems of Westeros can be hacked, corrupted, and turned against their original purposes by anyone clever enough to understand their true nature. Theory 9. The Missing Lion Cub, a Dornish gambit for future reckoning. The disappearance of Tyrek Lannister during the King's Landing riots wasn't the random casualty of mob violence that history records. It was the opening move in a Dornish revenge plot decades in the making. While the realm focused on the obvious players in the Game of Thrones, Dorne was quietly positioning pieces for a reckoning that would make the Red Wedding look like a children's squabble. Tyrek represented the perfect target for Dornish operatives. a minor Lannister with access to family secrets, but without the protection afforded to more prominent members of the family. His disappearance during the chaos of the riots provided perfect cover for an extraction operation that had been planned long before the first stone was thrown. The Dornish agents didn't just seize an opportunity, they created it using their network of spies in King's Landing to orchestrate the riot's timing and trajectory. But Tyrek's value to Dorne extends far beyond simple revenge. As Jaime suspected, the young Lannister possessed dangerous knowledge about King Robert's death and the circumstances surrounding it. More importantly, he had intimate knowledge of Lannister family dynamics, financial arrangements, and political secrets accumulated through years of living in the heart of their power structure. In Dornish hands, this information could be weaponized to destroy House Lannister from within. The Dornish approach to justice operates on timescales that other houses can barely comprehend. While Northern lords plan in terms of seasons and reach, lords think in terms of years, Dorne plans in terms of generations. The capture of Tyrek wasn't about immediate gratification, it was about positioning for a future revelation that would maximize psychological damage to their enemies. They're waiting for the perfect moment when Tyrek's testimony could cause maximum devastation to Lannister interests. Consider the implications of a living Lannister witness to family crimes appearing at a crucial political moment. Tyrek could testify before the High Septon about Robert's murder, reveal financial corruption that would invalidate Lannister claims, or provide evidence of incest that would bastardize Cersei's children in the eyes of the faith. His word would carry weight precisely because he's a Lannister, turning the family's own blood against them. The operational sophistication required for Tyrek's extraction reveals the true extent of Dornish intelligence capabilities in King's Landing. They didn't just have eyes and ears in the capital, they had the ability to manipulate crowd dynamics, coordinate complex operations under extreme pressure, and spirit away a high-value target without leaving any trace. This suggests an intelligence network far more advanced and capable than anyone in King's Landing suspected. Prince Oberyn's presence in King's Landing during the Purple Wedding wasn't just about seeking justice for his sister. It was reconnaissance for operations already in motion. While everyone focused on his flamboyant personality and obvious desire for revenge, he was actually gathering intelligence to support ongoing Dornish operations, including the management of their Lannister prisoner. The psychological warfare aspect of Tyrek's disappearance is particularly sophisticated. By leaving his fate ambiguous, Dorne created a permanent source of anxiety for the Lannister family. Every family meeting, every sensitive conversation, every planning session is haunted by the possibility that Tyrek is somewhere recording their words for future use against them. The uncertainty is more valuable than any definitive resolution. Dorne's ultimate goal isn't just to destroy House Lannister, it's to do so in a way that validates their own cultural values of patience, subtlety, and long-term thinking. When Tyrek finally reappears, it will be at a moment carefully chosen to demonstrate that Dornish justice, while slow, is absolutely inevitable. The missing lion cub isn't missing at all, he's exactly where Dorne wants him, being carefully preserved as the ultimate weapon against the family that destroyed theirs. Theory 10. The Westerosi Gambit. Suppressing dragon power through stolen eggs. The Sea Lord of Braavos's acquisition of Elissa Farman's 3 stolen dragon eggs represents far more than a simple commercial transaction. It was a strategic masterstroke in Braavos's centuries-long campaign to prevent the resurgence of dragon power anywhere in the world. The Free City, founded by escaped Valyrian slaves, has never forgotten the terror of dragon lords, and they've spent generations ensuring that terror can never return. Braavos's entire economic and political system is built on the fundamental principle that no power should ever again achieve the kind of dominance that Valyria once held. The Iron Bank doesn't just lend money, it systematically prevents any single entity from accumulating enough power to threaten the balance of the known world. The acquisition of dragon eggs fits perfectly into this broader strategy of power, suppression, and control. The Sea Lord's willingness to pay Alyssa Farman's astronomical asking price wasn't driven by curiosity or prestige. It was an emergency response to an existential threat. The discovery that House Targaryen still possessed functional dragon eggs represented a potential return to the days when dragon lords could burn entire cities on a whim. From Braavos's perspective, preventing dragon resurgence was worth any cost. But the Braavosi didn't simply lock the eggs away. They studied them intensively, using their vast network of scholars, mages, and spies to understand exactly how dragon magic worked. This research served a dual purpose: learning how to prevent egg hatching and developing countermeasures against dragons should any others somehow be brought to life. The knowledge gained from studying Alyssa's eggs became the foundation for Braavos's anti-dragon protocols. The ironic twist in this story is that these same eggs, after decades of Braavosi anti-dragon research, may have eventually found their way to Daenerys Targaryen through the complex web of political alliances and trade relationships that connect the free cities. If true, this would mean that Braavos's attempt to suppress dragon power actually enabled its return, with their own research helping to ensure the eggs remained viable long enough to eventually hatch. King Jaehaerys thus's use of the stolen eggs as leverage with the Iron Bank reveals the true scope of the situation. The eggs weren't just valuable artifacts. They were weapons of mass destruction whose control could shift the entire balance of power in the known world. The Iron Bank's acceptance of them as collateral demonstrates their understanding of both their strategic value and the importance of keeping them out of Targaryen hands. The Braavosi approach to the dragon problem reflects their broader philosophy of preventing dangerous power concentrations through economic and political manipulation rather than direct military action. They couldn't prevent the Targaryens from conquering Westeros, but they could ensure that future dragon power would be limited by controlling access to the means of dragon reproduction. This theory recontextualizes the entire relationship between Braavos and the Targaryen dynasty. Every loan, every trade agreement, every diplomatic interaction has been part of a broader strategy to monitor and contain dragon power. The Iron Bank's famous motto that the Iron Bank will have its due takes on new meaning when viewed as a promise to extract payment not just in gold, but in the permanent suppression of Dragon Lord supremacy. The ultimate success or failure of the Braavosi gambit depends on whether their anti-dragon research proves effective against Daenerys' dragons. If their countermeasures work, they will have successfully prevented the return of Dragon Lord tyranny. If they fail, their own research may have inadvertently enabled the very resurgence they sought to prevent. Either way, the stolen dragon eggs represent one of the most sophisticated long-term strategic operations in recorded history, demonstrating that the greatest threats to power often come not from armies or assassins, but from patient financial institutions with very long memories. Theory 11. The Duskendale Gambit, a test of royal resolve by foreign powers. The defiance of Duskendale, traditionally viewed as Lord Dennis Darklin's desperate attempt to elevate his house's status, was actually a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation designed to probe the stability of the Targaryen regime and test the loyalty of the great houses. The real architects of this defiance were foreign agents working to assess Westeros's vulnerabilities for future exploitation. Lady Sarala of Myr, dismissed by history as the ambitious wife who pushed her husband toward rebellion, was actually a highly trained operative working for a consortium of Free City Magisters who saw opportunity in Westeros's internal divisions. Her marriage to Lord Dennis wasn't romantic coincidence. It was deep cover establishment, positioning her to influence a strategically important lord while gathering intelligence on the realm's political dynamics. The choice of Duskendale as the Focal point for this operation demonstrates sophisticated strategic thinking. The town's location made it economically significant but politically isolated, perfect for testing royal response without triggering immediate Great House intervention. Lord Dennis's legitimate grievances about port taxes and trade rights provided perfect cover for what was essentially a controlled experiment in royal authority. The foreign powers behind this operation weren't interested in Lord Dennis's success. They were studying the response patterns of both the Crown and the great houses. How quickly would the king react? Which lords would support royal authority versus local autonomy? How effective were Targaryen military capabilities without dragons? Every aspect of the crisis provided valuable intelligence about Westeros's power structures and potential weaknesses. Sarala's influence over her husband wasn't just pillow talk. It was professional manipulation designed to ensure that Dennis made exactly the choices that would maximize the intelligence value of the situation. Her ambition was actually careful psychological management, pushing him toward increasingly provocative actions that would force meaningful responses from the Crown and reveal the true state of royal power. The decision to hold King Aerys II personally hostage was the operation's masterstroke, designed to test the absolute limits of Great House loyalty and royal authority. Would the lords rally to their king's defense? Or would they hesitate to act against a fellow lord? How would they balance royal loyalty against political calculations? The hostage situation forced every major house to reveal their true priorities and capabilities. The psychological impact on Aerys II was an unexpected bonus that provided even more valuable intelligence. The foreign observers learned that the Targaryen king could be broken through relatively simple psychological pressure, information that would prove invaluable for future operations designed to destabilize the realm. Aerys's subsequent paranoia and erratic behavior demonstrated that the royal psyche was a viable target for indirect attack. Sir Barristan Selmy's rescue of the king ended the immediate crisis, but couldn't undo the intelligence gathering that had already occurred. The foreign powers had successfully mapped Westeros's political landscape, identified key weaknesses in royal authority, and demonstrated that even the Targaryen dynasty could be manipulated through careful pressure applied at strategic points. The long-term consequences of the Duskendale operation extended far beyond the immediate political fallout. The intelligence gathered during the crisis informed subsequent foreign interventions in Westerosi affairs, from trade manipulations to marriage alliances to military support for various factions during the civil wars that followed. Years later, when Varys began his own operations to destabilize the Targaryen regime, he was building on intelligence networks and operational patterns established during the Duskendale affair. The foreign powers had created a template for indirect regime manipulation that would be refined and repeated throughout the following decades. The true tragedy of Duskendale isn't that Lord Dennis was executed for his defiance. It's that his genuine grievances and legitimate political concerns were exploited by foreign intelligence services to gather information that would eventually contribute to the destruction of the very kingdom he had served. Theory 12. The Blackfire Plague. Destabilizing sickness from the east, the Great Spring Sickness that devastated Westeros and conveniently eliminated King Daeron II. Targaryen, along with his direct heirs, wasn't entirely natural. It was biological warfare conducted by Blackfire, loyalists using esoteric knowledge of diseases acquired in the free cities. This represents one of history's most sophisticated assassination plots, designed to create the perfect conditions for a renewed Blackfire claim to the Iron Throne. The timing of the Great Spring Sickness was too convenient to be coincidental. The plague struck just as the realm had begun to stabilize after the first Blackfire rebellion, eliminating the very Targaryen leaders who had successfully defended the crown against the first challenge to their legitimacy. The subsequent Second Blackfire Rebellion followed so quickly that it suggests careful coordination between the plague's introduction and the military preparations of Blackfire supporters. The Blackfire loyalists who fled to the free cities after their defeat weren't just seeking refuge. They were positioning themselves to acquire the knowledge and resources necessary for unconventional warfare against the Targaryen regime. The free cities possessed extensive knowledge of exotic diseases, poisons, and biological agents that were unknown in Westeros, making them the perfect base of operations for this kind of attack. The plague's characteristics suggest deliberate cultivation and modification rather than natural occurrence. Its rapid spread through King's Landing, its particular virulence among the royal family, and its eventual fade demonstrate patterns consistent with an engineered biological agent rather than a naturally occurring disease. The Blackfire agents had learned to weaponize disease in ways that Westerosi meisters couldn't detect or counter. The introduction method was elegantly simple and virtually untraceable. Trade goods, diplomatic gifts, or even individual agents could have carried the disease into Westeros without arousing suspicion. The free city's extensive trade networks with King's Landing provided numerous opportunities for covert biological warfare that would appear completely natural to contemporary observers. The specific targeting of the royal family suggests that the plague was designed to be particularly effective against individuals with Targaryen blood, possibly exploiting genetic vulnerabilities that the Blackfire agents had identified through their own shared heritage. This would explain why the disease was so devastating to Daeron II, Valar, and Mataris, while affecting the general population less severely. The psychological impact of the plague served the Blackfire cause as effectively as its physical effects. By demonstrating that even the royal family was vulnerable to forces beyond their control, the plague undermined confidence in Targaryen divine right and magical protection. If the dragon's blood couldn't protect them from disease, what other weaknesses might they possess? The Second Blackfire Rebellion's leadership knew exactly when to strike because they had orchestrated the conditions that made their rebellion possible. They weren't responding to opportunity. They were executing a multi-phase operation that began with biological warfare and concluded with military action. The coordination required for this suggests planning and resources far beyond what traditional histories acknowledge. The cover-up of the plague's true nature was as sophisticated as its deployment. By the time meisters and political observers realized the suspicious circumstances surrounding the outbreak, the evidence had been destroyed, and the responsible agents had disappeared back into the free city's anonymous populations. The official historical record attributes the deaths to natural causes because the alternative, acknowledging successful biological warfare against the royal family, would have been too destabilizing to admit. This theory transforms the great spring sickness from a tragic coincidence into a masterpiece of unconventional warfare, demonstrating that the Blackfire threat to Targaryen rule was far more sophisticated and dangerous than traditional military rebellion. It also establishes a precedent for biological warfare in Westeros that may have influenced later events, including other suspicious outbreaks and the development of Qyburn's more obvious biological weapons. The true legacy of the Blackfire plague isn't just the deaths it caused, but the proof that even the most powerful dynasties can be brought down by enemies clever enough to wage war through disease rather than steel. Theory 13. The unseen architects of rebellion, disenfranchisement, and the Black Dragon, the first Blackfire. Rebellion wasn't simply the product of Demon Blackfire's personal ambition or Igor Rivers's bitter resentment. It was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy by established lords who felt marginalized by King Daeron II's progressive policies and saw an opportunity to install a more traditional, controllable monarch. The rebellion's true architects remained hidden in plain sight, using Demon as their charismatic figurehead while pulling the strings from the shadows. Daeron II's reign represented a fundamental shift in Westerosi political culture that threatened the traditional power structures many great houses had spent centuries building. His integration of Dawn through marriage rather than conquest, his emphasis on scholarly pursuits over martial prowess, and his apparent willingness to elevate merit over birthright created anxiety among lords who preferred the predictable hierarchies of the past. The conspiracy began forming years before the rebellion erupted, with subtle coordination between houses that publicly maintained loyalty to the crown while privately expressing concerns about the kingdom's direction. These lords didn't want to be seen as rebels themselves. They wanted to be the power behind a more amenable throne, using Daemon's obvious royal charisma and martial prowess as their vehicle for regime change. Daemon Blackfire's resemblance to Aegon the Conqueror wasn't just a convenient propaganda tool. It was the central element of a carefully constructed political narrative designed to appeal to lords nostalgic for the golden age of Targaryen conquest. The conspirators promoted the idea that Daemon represented a return to traditional Targaryen values of strength, conquest, and clear hierarchical authority that Daeron II's more nuanced approach had allegedly abandoned. The financial resources required for the rebellion scale suggest backing far beyond what Daemon and his immediate supporters could have provided independently. Armies don't feed themselves, and the professional quality of Blackfire forces indicates significant investment from wealthy backers who preferred to remain anonymous. These shadow financiers were likely great lords using intermediaries to fund the rebellion while maintaining plausible deniability. The timing of the rebellion wasn't determined by Daemon's readiness to challenge his half-brother. It was coordinated to coincide with maximum political instability created by ongoing tensions over Dornish integration. The conspirators waited until Daeron III's policies had created enough general dissatisfaction to provide cover for their more specific grievances about losing traditional privileges and influence. The Battle of the Red Grass Fields outcome wasn't just military victory for royal forces. It was the exposure and destruction of a network of traditional lords who had overestimated their ability to control events they had set in motion. Many of the rebellion's secret supporters found themselves exposed when Daemon's defeat made their hidden backing irrelevant and dangerous. The psychological profile of the conspiracy reveals lords who genuinely believed they were saving the realm from decline, not pursuing personal advancement. They saw Daeron II's scholarly nature and diplomatic approach as weakness that would eventually lead to Westeros being dominated by foreign powers, particularly Dorne. Their support for Daemon wasn't treasonous ambition. It was patriotic concern, channeled through traditional power structures. The rebellion's aftermath saw the permanent alteration of several great house dynamics, as families split between those who had secretly supported Daemon and those who had remained genuinely loyal to Daeron II. These internal divisions would influence political alignments for generations, creating lasting factional tensions that would surface during later crises. The most sophisticated aspect of the conspiracy was its use of legitimate political concerns as cover for personal power preservation. By framing their support for Daemon in terms of defending Westerosi traditions against foreign influence, the conspirators transformed self-interested rebellion into patriotic resistance, making it difficult for even loyal lords to completely condemn their motivations. The conspiracy's ultimate failure wasn't due to lack of planning or resources. It was due to underestimating both Daemon's independent will and the loyalty that Daeron II had actually built among lords who appreciated his more inclusive approach to governance. The conspirators discovered too late that they had created a tool they couldn't fully control and challenged a king who was stronger than they had assumed. This understanding reframes the First Blackfire Rebellion from a dynastic dispute into a fundamental conflict between competing visions of royal authority, with hidden power brokers attempting to restore traditional hierarchies through carefully orchestrated regime change that ultimately exposed their own limitations and led to their political destruction. Theory 14. The Trident's Echo. Rhaegar's reign of prophetic ruin. Had Prince Rhaegar Targaryen emerged victorious from the Battle of the Trident, but lost Lyanna Stark in the process, his subsequent reign would have become a catastrophe of prophetic obsession and melancholic detachment that fractured the realm more completely than his father's madness ever could. The alternative timeline where Rhaegar wins the battle but loses his soul reveals the fundamental flaw in his character that made him unfit for the crown he so desperately wanted to claim. Rhaegar's victory over Robert Baratheon would have been Pyrrhic in the extreme, achieved at the cost of everything that had motivated his rebellion against his father in the first place. With Lyanna dying in childbirth at the Tower of Joy, a death he would have blamed entirely on his own obsession with prophecy, Rhaegar would have ascended the Iron Throne as a broken man, consumed by guilt and an even more intense fixation on the prince that was promised prophecy. The psychological transformation would have been immediate and devastating. The Rhaegar who had once been praised for his intelligence and musical talent would have become a hollow shell, ruling through prophecy rather than politics and making decisions based on cryptic interpretations rather than practical governance. His court would have become a gathering place for fortune-tellers, mystics, and prophetic interpreters, replacing the traditional advisors necessary for effective rule. His relationship with Elia Martell and their children would have become strained, beyond repair, poisoned by his obvious grief for Lyanna and his obsessive focus on determining which child might fulfill the prophecy he had died for. This would have permanently alienated Dorne, transforming their integration into the realm from Daeron II's diplomatic success into a source of constant tension and potential rebellion. The proposed Great Council that Rhaegar had planned to convene for governmental reform would have become a disaster of prophetic interpretation rather than practical politics. Instead of addressing the realm's actual problems, Rhaegar would have used the gathering to seek validation for his prophetic beliefs and to gain support for increasingly erratic policies based on mystical visions rather than political necessity. The Long Night's eventual arrival would have found the realm completely unprepared, not because they lacked prophetic warning, but because Rhaegar's obsession with prophecy had prevented him from taking practical defensive measures. His single-minded focus on identifying and preparing the prince that was promised would have consumed resources and attention that should have been directed toward military preparation, diplomatic alliance building, and the practical logistics of defending the realm. The great houses would have gradually lost faith in Targaryen leadership as Rhaegar's prophetic obsession led to increasingly disconnected royal policies. Lords who had supported his rebellion against Aerys II's madness would have found themselves dealing with a different but equally problematic form of royal dysfunction, one that prioritized mystical concerns over the realm's practical needs. Rhaegar's melancholic detachment would have made him vulnerable to manipulation by ambitious advisors and prophetic charlatans, seeking to advance their own agendas through royal favor. The court would have become a breeding ground for conspiracy and intrigue as various factions competed to influence the king's prophetic interpretations for their own benefit. The military implications would have been particularly severe, as Rhaegar's focus on prophecy would have led to strategic decisions based on mystical considerations rather than tactical reality. Resources would have been wasted on prophetically significant but militarily useless preparations, while actual defensive needs were ignored in favor of symbolic gestures toward destiny. The ultimate irony is that Rhaegar's victory at the Trident would have made the prophesied threat he feared even more likely to succeed. By fragmenting the realm through his prophetic obsession and alienating the very allies he needed for effective defense, his reign would have created the perfect conditions for the Long Night to achieve what it had failed to accomplish in previous attempts. The alternative timeline reveals that Rhaegar's fundamental character flaw wasn't his love for Lyanna or his desire to fulfill prophecy. It was his inability to balance mystical concerns with practical governance, making him ultimately unsuited for the crown, regardless of his victory or defeat at the Trident. Theory 15. Joramun's Horn and the Night King's true aim, shattering the wall's wards from within. The legendary Horn of Winter, said to wake giants from the earth and potentially bring down the wall itself, wasn't just a weapon the Night King sought for conventional military purposes. It was the key component in a sophisticated magical operation designed to destroy the wall's protective wards from the southern side, where they were most vulnerable to corruption and reversal. The Night King's corruption by his corpse queen hadn't just changed his loyalties, it had given him intimate knowledge of the wall's magical construction and the specific weaknesses built into its protective systems. As a former Lord Commander, he understood the wall's military and logistical functions, but his supernatural transformation revealed its deeper magical architecture and the critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right knowledge and tools. The wall's magical wards weren't designed to repel attack from the south because their builders never anticipated that the defenders themselves might become the threat. The ancient magic woven into the wall's foundations assumed that anyone approaching from the south would be human and therefore inherently opposed to the other's agenda. This assumption created a critical blind spot that the Night King was uniquely positioned to exploit. Joramun's horn possessed the specific magical frequency necessary to disrupt the wall's foundational enchantments, but only when activated from the southern side by someone with the proper authorization codes built into the wall's defensive matrix. The Night King's position as Lord Commander had given him access to these authorization protocols, making him the only person capable of using the horn effectively against the wall's own defenses. The plan's sophistication reveals the true intelligence behind the other's strategic thinking. Rather than attempting to breach the wall through brute force, an approach that had failed in previous conflicts, they were attempting to turn the wall's own defenses against it, using human agents to activate weapons that could destroy the magical barriers from within. The Night King's sacrifices at the Night Fort weren't just offerings to his new masters. They were components in a complex ritual designed to gradually weaken the wall's magical foundations in preparation for the horn's final activation. Each sacrifice created small fractures in the protective matrix that would eventually allow the horn's disruptive frequency to propagate throughout the entire structure. Brandon the Breaker's alliance with Joramun wasn't just a political necessity for defeating the Night King. It was a desperate magical countermeasure to prevent the horn from being used for its intended purpose. Joramun's cooperation was essential, because only the horn's rightful keeper could safely neutralize its power without triggering the very destruction it was designed to cause. The timing of the Night King's downfall suggests that Brandon and Joramun acted just before the final phase of the magical operation could be completed. The Night King had spent 13 years carefully preparing the wall's defenses for the horn's activation, and his defeat came at the moment when all the preliminary work was finished and only the final ritual remained. The reason Mance Rayder never found the true Horn of Winter during his searches isn't because it was hidden too well. It's because Joramun deliberately destroyed or permanently neutralized it after the Night King's defeat, recognizing that, as long as the horn existed, it represented an existential threat to the wall's integrity that could be exploited by future supernatural enemies. The wall's continued effectiveness against the others proves that Joramun's countermeasures were successful. But the theoretical vulnerability that the Night King attempted to exploit remains built into the structure. Any future enemy with sufficient knowledge of the wall's magical architecture and access to similar disruptive tools could potentially repeat the attempt with different methods. This understanding transforms the Night's King from a simple traitor who collaborated with the enemy into a sophisticated magical terrorist who nearly succeeded in dismantling humanity's primary defense through insider knowledge and supernatural assistance. His legacy isn't just 13 years of horror at the Night Fort. It's proof that the Wall's greatest weakness has always been the possibility that its own defenders might turn against it. The true tragedy of the Night's King's corruption is that his deep knowledge of the Wall's defenses, acquired through years of faithful service, became the very weapon used to threaten everything he had once sworn to protect. Theory 16. The Dragon's Blood Deception, a legacy of guarded secrets. The Targaryen doctrine that the blood of the dragon must remain pure for successful dragon riding was never about inherent biological superiority. It was an elaborate deception, designed to protect specific Valyrian dragon-taming techniques and ritual knowledge from spreading beyond the Dragon Lord families. The emphasis on bloodline purity served as both cover story and security protocol for magical practices that could theoretically be learned by anyone with sufficient dedication and proper instruction. The existence of dragon riders like Nettles, who successfully tamed the wild dragon sheepstealer despite having no confirmed Valyrian noble blood, proves that dragon bonding isn't dependent on genetic inheritance. Her success demonstrates that the techniques for establishing dragon partnerships can work for individuals outside the traditional Dragon Lord bloodlines, undermining the entire foundation of Targaryen claims about blood purity requirements. The Valyrian Freehold's original Dragon Lord families developed their dragon taming methods through centuries of experimentation, magical research, and accumulated practical experience. These techniques involved complex combinations of behavioral, conditioning, magical rituals, psychological manipulation, and practical animal handling that required extensive training and cultural knowledge to master effectively. The blood purity doctrine served multiple strategic purposes for the Dragon Lord families. It discouraged outsiders from attempting to steal or replicate their dragon taming methods by convincing them that success was impossible without the proper bloodline. It justified the extreme measures taken to prevent knowledge from spreading to potential rivals or enemies. Most importantly, it created a self-reinforcing mythology that made the Dragon Lord seem inherently superior rather than simply more knowledgeable. The incestuous marriage practices of Valyrian Dragon Lord families weren't primarily about preserving magical bloodlines. They were about maintaining tight control over access to dragon-taming knowledge within trusted family circles. By limiting marriage outside their bloodlines, the Dragon Lords ensured that their techniques remained concentrated within a small group of families who could monitor and control each other's use of dragon power. The real dragon-taming techniques likely involved specific ritual preparations, psychological conditioning methods, magical protections, and behavioral approaches that could be taught to any sufficiently dedicated student. The Targaryens' occasional success in hatching and bonding with dragons wasn't due to their blood. It was due to their preservation of fragments of the original Valyrian knowledge base. Nettles's success with Sheepstealer suggests that she either independently developed effective dragon-taming techniques through trial and error, or she gained access to genuine Valyrian knowledge through some undocumented source. Her methods, particularly her use of food offerings to build trust with the dragon, demonstrate practical animal handling techniques that have nothing to do with bloodline inheritance. The Targaryen family's declining success with dragon hatching and bonding over the generations wasn't due to bloodline dilution. It was due to the gradual loss of the original Valyrian knowledge base as family members died in wars, accidents, and political conflicts without properly passing on their accumulated expertise to the next generation. The Dance of the Dragons revealed the true fragility of the Targaryen dragon program when multiple family members successfully bonded with dragons, despite having varying degrees of blood purity. The conflict's outcome had more to do with political and military factors than with any inherent magical superiority, demonstrating that dragon power alone couldn't guarantee victory without proper strategic application. The ultimate deception of the dragon blood doctrine is that it convinced even the Targaryens themselves that their power was inherent rather than learned. This self-deception contributed to their decline by making them overconfident in their natural abilities while neglecting the practical knowledge and techniques that had originally made dragon bonding possible. Modern attempts to understand dragon bonding focus on bloodline inheritance because the Targaryens successfully buried the original Valyrian techniques beneath centuries of mythological misdirection. The real knowledge remains hidden in fragmentary texts, oral traditions, and practical experimentation that most scholars dismiss as irrelevant because they accept the blood purity explanation at face value. This theory suggests that dragon power could potentially be restored by anyone willing to invest the time and effort necessary to rediscover the original Valyrian techniques, making dragons a far more democratic and dangerous force than traditional histories suggest. Theory 17. The blood price of Valyrian steel, a forgotten sacrificial rite. The legendary Valyrian steel, renowned for its supernatural sharpness, impossible lightness, and eternal edge, wasn't created through simple metallurgy enhanced by dragonfire. It required a specific blood sacrifice ritual that formed an integral part of the forging process. This vital component was lost even before the doom of Valyria, as the Dragon Lord families grew either too arrogant to respect the ancient traditions or too fearful of the moral cost required for true mastery. The creation of genuine Valyrian steel involved far more than the commonly understood combination of dragonfire, folded metal, and magical spells. The process required the willing sacrifice of a person with specific magical sensitivity, whose life force would be bound into the metal itself during the forging process. This wasn't random murder. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual that required the sacrifice's consent and understanding of their role in creating something that would endure long after their death. The blood sacrifice served multiple functions in the steel's creation. The magical energy released during the ritual death provided the binding force that held the steel's supernatural properties in permanent suspension. The sacrifice's life force became part of the weapon's essential nature, giving it not just sharpness and durability, but a form of semi-consciousness that allowed it to remain effective against supernatural threats across centuries of use. The specific requirements for an effective sacrifice explain why Valyrian steel production declined even before the Doom. The ritual demanded individuals with rare combinations of magical sensitivity, moral purity, and willing acceptance of their fate. As Valyrian society became more focused on conquest and exploitation, finding people who met these criteria became increasingly difficult, leading to attempts to substitute unwilling victims or magically inadequate sacrifices. These failed. Substitutions produced inferior steel that lacked the full supernatural properties of true Valyrian blades. While still superior to ordinary steel due to the dragonfire and magical techniques involved, these lesser weapons gradually diluted the reputation and understanding of what genuine Valyrian steel required. The knowledge of proper sacrifice protocols was lost as smiths tried to replicate the results without understanding the essential components. The blood bonding process explains several mysterious properties of Valyrian steel that traditional metallurgy cannot account for. The steel's ability to hold an edge indefinitely isn't just physical perfection. It's maintained by the embedded life force that continues to reinforce the weapon's structure. The steel's effectiveness against supernatural creatures stems from its fundamental nature as a hybrid of physical metal and spiritual energy. The psychological impact of wielding Valyrian steel, often noted by its users, the sense of the weapon being alive or responsive to their intentions, reflects the actual presence of the sacrifice's consciousness within the metal. These weapons don't just cut flesh. They can sense and adapt to supernatural threats because they retain fragments of human awareness bound into their essential structure. The ritual's moral complexity explains why knowledge of the process was so carefully guarded and eventually lost. The Dragon Lord families were willing to perform necessary sacrifices for weapons of strategic importance, but they were also ashamed of the practice and reluctant to document it fully. This secrecy contributed to the knowledge's fragmentation and eventual disappearance. The Doom of Valyria eliminated not just the physical infrastructure for steel production, but also the cultural and spiritual framework that had made the sacrificial rituals possible. The catastrophic destruction disrupted the magical traditions, scattered the knowledgeable practitioners, and created such trauma that survivors were unwilling or unable to reconstruct the complete process. Modern smiths who attempt to recreate Valyrian steel fail, not because they lack technical skill or magical power, but because they don't understand that the process requires a fundamental transformation of human life into metallurgical enhancement. Without the sacrificial component, even the most skilled smiths with access to dragonfire can only produce superior steel, not the supernatural alloy that defines true Valyrian blades. The existing Valyrian steel weapons, scattered throughout the world, represent finite repositories of ancient sacrificial magic, irreplaceable artifacts that embody the life force of forgotten individuals who died to create tools for humanity's defense. Each blade carries within it not just metallurgical perfection, but the spiritual essence of someone who chose to transform their mortality into eternal protection for future generations. This understanding transforms Valyrian steel from mere superior weaponry into sacred artifacts that bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual realms. Weapons that are literally alive with the consciousness of their creators' sacrifices and therefore uniquely suited to combat threats that exist beyond normal physical limitations. The pattern revealed. The 18 theories presented here offer more than alternative explanations for familiar events. They reveal the hidden architecture underlying all of human history in the known world. From the cosmic monitoring systems of the oily black stones to the sacrificial energies that power Valyrian steel. From the psychological manipulation networks of ancient strongholds to the biological warfare capabilities of exile communities. Every aspect of this world operates according to principles far more sophisticated and interconnected than surface events suggest. The true horror and wonder of Westeros lies not in its obvious conflicts and dramatic revelations, but in the realization that every major event has been part of a larger pattern designed to test and develop humanity's potential for transcending its current limitations. The Game of Thrones is revealed as merely the surface layer of a much deeper game played on cosmic scales, with stakes that extend far beyond the fate of any single kingdom or dynasty. Whether these forces represent benevolent guidance toward enlightenment or manipulation toward unknown ends remains the ultimate question that will determine not just who sits the Iron Throne, but what humanity itself will become when the final moves are played and the true nature of the game is finally revealed. The bleeding star rises once more, and the ancient pattern nears completion.